Hello, it's Peter here on a Marketing Study Lab special. Regular programming will resume shortly, but for today, enjoy, as we're talking all things creative. Yes, as the first special, the very first Marketing Study Lab special, we need a special guest, and I'm delighted to be accompanied on this episode by Mr. Dave Birss, who amongst some other interesting titles, which we'll find out a bit about later, is the author of How to Get to Great Ideas, a book all about, well, getting great ideas. Before we get stuck into the innovative world that Dave has created in this book, I just want to let you all know that it's out tomorrow. Links are in the show notes as always, but forget the notes. Just go to Amazon, type in Dave Birss, which is D-A-V-E, standard, B-I-R-S-S, and you'll see it. It's yellow and it has squiggles on the front. Now, once you've pre-ordered it, you will get given a special access code that will allow you to listen to the rest of this episode in any language you want. So keep a lookout for that code, but if you can't find it, don't worry. The default language is set to English/Scottish, so you should be fine if you understood the first part of this intro. If you don't, well, keep looking for the code. Right, let's speak to Dave about his book and creativity. And what I want to know first is what everybody's thinking, and that is, what is the key to a good lasagna?
Oh, to me, it's when you've got your meaty bolognese sauce and you just want to boil it for ages. You just want to cook it for a really long time, and it just reduces down. And as it reduces down, you just get more and more flavor. So for me, that's what I do. And I also like flavory bits in there, like putting in chorizo and things like that, just to give it a little bit more depth of flavor. But of course, gluten-free pasta. I'm gluten-free, sadly. Okay. But there's some good gluten-free pastas now. So that's I'd say that the secret for me is just get the bolognese and just boil it for ages.
Fantastic, and add whatever you feel.
Yeah.
Right, let's get on to some more serious questions. Tell us your story. What's been the formula that's brought you to this stage of your career as author, public speaker, consultant, and more importantly, chief thinker at Right Thinking, and author of How to Get to Great Ideas?
Wow, a formula for such mayhem. I don't think it kind of shows that I don't really have a formula. I think for me, I've always had a little bit of corporate attention deficit disorder, I guess. And I started from when I was at university. I thought that I wanted to be a musician. And I thought that what I'll do is I'll do a degree so that I've got something to fall back on. And then I did a degree in computer programming. And when I came out of university, there weren't any jobs. So I went back and I did a postgraduate, and I did a postgraduate in marketing. And towards the end of that, during that year, I'd started to work as a session musician. So I was going into recording studios, and I was known as Dave and his bag of weird shit. And I would unzip this bag, and people would pull things out and they'd go, "What's that?" And I go, it's a rebab. It's a one-stringed Middle Eastern violin. What does that sound like? Ying, ying, ying. What is that? It's a theremin. Woo, woo. So I'd pull out these weird musical instruments. And towards the end of my postgraduate, I then got offered a job by a record label in Scotland. And I begged them to let me finish my course, so that I then went into music as a career. And I was a session musician and a recording engineer, and I helped with the marketing of the label. And I did that for a while and did a lot of touring and did a lot of recording, and then fell into being a stand-up comedian and doing radio, AA Roadwatch broadcasts on the radio. So I would be in a recording studio at 5 a.m, and in Scotland, I'd be on these radio shows going, and there's a tailback in the M8 for about 3 miles at junction 6. That would be me in the morning.
How hard was that to not include some kind of comic value in that if you were doing comedy at the same time?
It was, yeah. I would try and get a little bit of charm in there, but it's hard. You're talking about traffic accidents and things. You can't put too much
Yeah,
comedy
yeah.
in there. Of course, it's Scotland, so it's talking about things in the Highlands and saying, there's a blockage on the M693. It's there's some sheep on the road, so there's a lot of that. Um, but as you can see, I kind of like meandered, and then going from being stand-up comedian, I got offered a TV series by the BBC. I think I was 21. Got offered part of a TV series, and at the same time, I got offered my first job in advertising. And I took advertising. I turned down the TV series and I took advertising because I mistakenly thought that it was being a sit-down comedian. And it's not. It's trying to sell stuff. I then spent the next 20 years in advertising, but I've always had things on the side because I think it's really important. If your job isn't feeding your soul, if it's not fully scratching your itch to make stuff, and advertising never fully scratched my itch. I had to have stuff on the side, so I started up a social enterprise. I had a patented invention. I ran a recording studio on the side at one point. I did radio breakfast shows, and I used to do that on a Friday morning. I would co-host a breakfast show, and then go down to be creative director of a big agency in London afterwards. And no one in the agency knew that I was doing a breakfast show in the morning because it was way up in Cambridgeshire, and I was coming down to London afterwards. And then from advertising in 2010, I was creative director of an agency, one of the big ones, and I wasn't really enjoying it, so I quit and decided just to quit the whole industry because at one of the things I'd done in the last agency is I'd set up a learning department. So I'd set up a series of lectures, and every 2 weeks there would be a compulsory lecture for the creative departments to come along to. And it ended up becoming quite popular. So we'd get planning departments and account handlers coming along and certain leadership in the agency. And rather than being for the 30 or 40 people in my department, we ended up having like 100 odd people coming along every time we put the lecture on. And I would talk about something different every couple of weeks. And it'd be sometimes, I mean, this is 10 years ago, so it was the early days of Internet of Things, and I'd be explaining what it was, how it worked, the principles you need to come up with good ideas, showing examples. And this, I spotted how this really changed the work that was coming out of the department, because what had been happening previously is people were coming to me and I was looking at the ideas and going, yeah, that's nice, right, that's okay, but I want you to push it in this direction. And I'd be pushing them to try and do the work in the direction I wanted. But then what happened when I started doing these lectures is that it was a pull mentality. I was showing people where the good stuff was. And it meant that people were coming to me with the good stuff. I wasn't having to push them in that direction. And the work completely changed. So I thought I would offer it to the whole industry. I went out there 2010 to offer it to the industry at the very time that the industry went through. That's when the financial crisis hit the advertising industry. And there was no money whatsoever. And I had to pivot. And I started doing all sorts of other stuff. I was doing corporate training. I was teaching at universities, and I was sort of flying all over the world to teach courses at universities. And then from that, I started doing work with the Drum magazine. So I became the editor at large for the Drum magazine. And through that relationship I had with them, we ended up accidentally doing a television series. So we were just doing some videos for a client, but I decided that with the budget, I could actually do 6 half-hour TV shows. So I filmed this series, which I wrote and directed and presented myself. And as soon as we put it out online, the TV stations started contacting us going, do you have a distributor for this? Can we broadcast it? So about 5 years ago, that series went out UK television and other countries as well. Then that got me into doing lots of public speaking. The public speaking has led to me writing books. And now this year has been the year of the book for me. So by the end of this year, there will be 8 books published that I've been involved in. three of which I've written completely myself. One I've co-written, and other ones that I've contributed to. So
Fantastic.
that's where I am now. So this year I'm an author. I don't know what I'm going to be next year.
Well, it sounds like anything at the moment. Who knows? You could even be a podcaster. You could try that.
Well, I've got some recordings. I'm going to be bringing out a podcast in the next few months as well.
How dare you?
So, yeah, I know. It's a crowded market. I'll make it very different. My podcast is purely going to be lasagna based.
Oh, brilliant! That's fantastic. You've definitely got one listener here. I'm gonna have to go gluten free as well, aren't I?
I think so. I know I've got someone at the moment who's trying to pressure me to go vegan as well.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know what that's going to be like. Vegan lasagna, vegan gluten-free lasagna. I mean, it might just be flavor-free. I think that's the next thing after that. It's just flavor-free food.
Yeah, paper.
Yeah, sort of Soylent Green. It's that sort of paste. It's like wallpaper paste. It just sustains you but doesn't give you any flavor. That I think that's my life. I think from now on.
Moving on. Let's talk about the book that is to be published or released tomorrow. It's called How to Get to Great Ideas. What's it all about?
It is about it's about 230 pages.
Nice one. Dave, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, let's. Well, I mean, it's quite a run-seal title, really, isn't it? How to Get to Great Ideas. It's split into 4 sections. The first section looks at what creativity is, because there's so many misunderstandings, myths, misconceptions about creativity. So I try and get rid of all that bull crap early on and try and describe exactly what creativity is in a way that's far more accessible. And then the next section, I have a system to help people solve any problem using this system. So it's called the Right Thinking System. And it just stands for research, insight, generate ideas, hone ideas, test ideas. And it's just a very simple way of being able to go from I need a solution to I have a solution. Then the next section after that is how individuals can get better at coming up with ideas. And then the final section is how companies can be better at coming up with ideas and getting better ideas out of their employees. Because, to be honest, most organizations that I've worked with in my time, even advertising agencies, are actually set up to kill stuff that is different. So it's actually, how do you create an organization that gets great ideas out of people and has a far better chance of those ideas happening?
Nice little synopsis there. You mentioned the first chapter about dispelling some myths about creativity. Can you give us some of those myths without giving too much away?
Yes, certainly. I mean, one of the things that gets me is that people think creativity is a binary thing, that something is either creative or it's not. You know, that people are either creative or they're not. An idea is either creative or it's not. But it's just not true. It's just not the way it is. I mean, everyone has the potential to be creative. All that creativity really is about getting to non-obvious ideas. Any idea that's obvious and hasn't required effort is what we consider to not be creative. When you get to the non-obvious stuff, when you apply thinking, that's what we consider to be creative. So when you understand then that binaries, that creativity isn't a binary thing, it's actually a sliding scale, then I think it's far easier for people to get on board, and then to understand that if you want to get better ideas, it's going to take more thinking. And that's, it's as simple as it is. So I think that that's an important thing. I think another thing that's important is understanding that creativity doesn't equal art. And a lot of people conflate those two things. They think that, it's creative, it's all arty-farty stuff. And because they feel alienated when they go to an art gallery, that they kind of go, that isn't for me. But I think we have to split creativity into 2 different camps. And you've got creative doing. That's the kind of the artistic stuff. That's the things that takes like 10,000 hours of focused practice to get really good at something, to be a fantastic violinist, to be an amazing painter. You put in the time and then it just becomes this thing that's natural to you. You kind of master it. And that takes quite a quite a dysfunctional kind of human, to be honest, to put in that amount of time and that amount of effort to become fantastic at playing a bit of wood with strings on it. The other side of it is something we can all do, and that's creative thinking. So it's to separate creativity into creative doing and creative thinking. Some people are great at executing, and some people are great at coming up with ideas, but the coming up with ideas bit is something we can all do and we can all get better at. And that's kind of where I concentrate. As much as I've been one of these dysfunctional musicians, really it's about the creative thinking, and that's what I'm really passionate about, and helping people get better at doing that themselves.
So, in your mind, can creativity or innovative thinking be actually taught then?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just that there's so many misunderstandings where we're not taught how to do it. I mean, with education, there's this misunderstanding that, hey, we do creativity at school. We've got an art department, we've got a music department, we've got a drama lab, and it's like, yeah, you're kind of doing the creative doing bit again. You're not teaching creative thinking. The rest of school is about teaching kids what to think, not how to think. So when you teach people how to think, it's quite liberating. And one of the things that I explain to people is that if you want to get good at coming up with ideas, most companies, and I've just had an email this afternoon telling me that there's a company wanting me to do this, and I don't want to disparage them. Thank you, company, for getting in touch. However, brainstorming techniques is not the way to do it. So a lot of companies ask me, can you teach us some brainstorming techniques? And I'm usually like, yeah, sure I can, but that's not really going to have a massive effect. You know, brainstorms, they're 76 years old, and they've been scientifically proven to be a load of old tosh. You know, they actually lead to worse ideas, fewer ideas, less diverse ideas than having the same group of people working by themselves for the same amount of time individually. So it's not about that. You see, that's the processing part. What's more important is your brain as a processor. It's input, process, output. If you want to have amazing output, you have to have amazing input. So if you think of a data set, if you've got a really crappy set of data and you put it through a Cray supercomputer, you're still going to get crappy results. You know, it's what in computer terms they call GIGO, garbage in, garbage out.
Absolutely.
And if you've got a fantastic data set and you put it through a program in a Raspberry Pi, you're probably going to get really good results because your data set was right in the first place. Now, most people, they don't feed their mind very interesting stuff. If you've got the same stuff in your head as everyone else around you has in their head, you're of no value. You're going to come up with the same kind of ideas as they come up with because the input defines the output. If you've got stuff in your head that no one else has in their head, then you can come up with ideas that no one else can come up with. And it's all about looking for the non-obvious. Because if you look for the non-obvious and start to put non-obvious things in your head, then that's naturally going to give you ideas that are in the non-obvious spectrum. And if we're saying that that is what creativity is about, you can see that what we define as creative ideas, it requires you to feed your mind. And it's the most important, the most valuable thing that people can do if they want better ideas, is to fill your mind with a breadth of stuff, and particularly stuff that you think other people haven't spotted.
There's a great example in your book, and it's to do with I won't spoil it for people, but it's to do with with some luggage and the noise it makes going over certain bumps and humps. But I'll let people explore that in reading your actual book. I want to move away from individuals to actual businesses. And why do you think businesses can struggle with generating fresh new ideas?
Because they don't understand what stage they are in the life cycle. So any company that starts, they start being very welcoming to ideas. Because to be honest, as a company, when you start out, you've got nothing. All you've got is ideas. You're inventing everything as you go along. Even if you're an accountancy practice, you're inventing, what is it we do? How do we operate? How do we find customers? How do we bill people? How do we find an office? How do we get a brand? It's all of these things. Everything is about what are ideas. They depend on ideas. So every company, when they start out, is welcoming to ideas. Now, if a company gets good at what it does, then it's got a little piece of magic to it. The next stage is the company then tries to systematize that magic so it can replicate the magic again and again. So at that point, the creative focus goes into creating a system to replicate. Whereas before it was about inventing everything, now it's about not inventing everything, it's about inventing a system that can replicate it. And then the third stage of a company is optimization. So you've got a system, and then what you're trying to do is you're just trying to tweak it and refine it to make it as good as it can be. And that's optimization. At that point, ideas are poisonous to a company. And the corporate antibodies come out and destroy anything that doesn't fit in, anything that might disrupt the organization, anything that seems to be different. So most companies that are in that stage, they don't want anything new, but they want to want things that are new, if that makes any sense. They would love to love innovation, but actually they really aren't set up for it. Mm-hmm. And what I find really funny is that a lot of these companies that are in this optimization stage of their life cycle, they send people on Silicon Valley safaris. So these people go to Silicon Valley to try and learn from these startups and to go and look at the latest stuff that Facebook's doing. And it's fun. San Francisco's a great place to be. I love it. It's a lovely city. But I really don't think they're learning very much, because it's an analogy I use in the book is that it's really like a bunch of pensioners who've got bladder control issues going to a nursery and asking the toddlers how they can fix their bladder control issue. And the toddlers haven't got it sorted yet. They don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They might give them some answers, but it's probably not going to be very helpful. And this is what happens, that you've got to understand the life stage that you're in as a company and be appropriate to the life stage you're in. So to me, there's a lot of companies who are established companies in an optimization stage who think that they need to act like a startup. And I think that that's foolish and misguided. I think there's a different way to do it when you're in an optimization stage. And it comes from leadership. And if the leadership are focused totally on optimization, the whole company is focused on optimization, and any innovation efforts will die. And a lot of companies have they've been hoping that innovation will save them, but they've not changed the company. They've not baked innovation into the culture of the company. So therefore, they've not succeeded. And McKinsey last year released a figure from one of their reports that 84 or 86% of CEOs believe that innovation is really important to the future of their business. Okay, that's the first bit. The second one is that 6% of CEOs are satisfied with their company's innovation. 6. So that means that 94% of CEOs are not satisfied with their company's innovation. Eesh. Holy shit! If that was a finance department, if there was a study done and it's only 6% of CEOs are satisfied with their company's finance department, could you imagine what would happen? It would be all over the press. There'd be investigations done. Immediate action would be taken. But this is innovation. And because nobody really understands what they're doing, nobody knows what the answer is. So this figure is kind of just not being spoken about. But I think there's so many problems with innovation in companies. And it's one of my things that I like to do is work with companies to show them how to do it better. And it changes from company to company, but there are a few tried and tested routes that really work.
Okay, so anyone can have an idea, or any company or CEO, sounds like, can have an idea. But it seems to be those that can execute it correctly that are set up to succeed. Is there a methodical way of actually doing this?
There's not a methodical way, but there's ways you can improve it. So it's the systems that you have within an organization. There's two different kinds of systems you can have. You can have a system that stifles or a system that liberates. Now, a system that stifles is kind of what we tend to have, because it's a top-down, patriarchal, hierarchical system, which is all about control. It's all about not trusting the people underneath you. And So if you think of a hierarchy in an organization, that each layer of a hierarchy is basically a layer of fear, um, where you've got people who act like lawyers. So if you've got a document, you've got a contract, and you take it to a lawyer, and you hand it to them, and you say, "What do you think?" And the lawyer looks at it, and they flick through it, and they go, "Yeah, looks all right." You don't feel as if the lawyers earned their money. No, the way that a lawyer proves their worth is by going, well, clause 13 is something I think we need to address because I don't feel that it's sufficiently protected you. I think that we need to look at this and we need to add this. Lawyers are there to spot problems. And what happens is layers in a hierarchy in an organization is like that. Each person believes that their job is to spot problems. And I feel that it kills ideas. It means that if an idea is expected to go through the hierarchy, it kills the idea because it damages it every level of the hierarchy. It makes it smaller. It loses its focus. Agendas get put onto it. And the idea itself ends up being hampered by the time it gets to decision makers. So no wonder companies are disappointed with innovation. So there's that side of it. And one of the things that I think the organizations need to do is actually kind of like turn themselves upside down and understand that in your hierarchy, the boss is at the very bottom, and their job is to support the people who answer into them, not to lord it over them. And their job is not to constantly spot problems. Their job is the opposite, is to spot opportunities. And when you spot opportunities, it's a completely different attitude. So the ideas go directly to the decision makers. And that is all about having a system that does that. And that's what I work with organizations, is to create systems that enable ideas to go through the business without being damaged.
Excellent answer. I don't think I can add
a long-winded answer. I'm very sorry.
No. That's absolutely perfect. That's what you're here to do. Answer the questions and impart your knowledge, so people will get your book and learn from it. That's why we're here. Technology is ever changing, and it changes the way we communicate, we do business, book taxes, a whole host of things. How has technology affected the way we actually think, especially within a creative mindset?
Well, I've got two answers to that. One is that it's not really affected the way we think. Humans are, as from last year, they kind of believe humans are 350,000 years old. Up until last year, we believed they were 200,000 years old. So we're almost twice as old as we thought we were. But the human brain in that time has not sped up the way that Pentium processors have. The human brain operates at the same speed as it's always done. We are bags of hormones and a whole bunch of flawed ways of processing things. So behavioral economics shows kind of how flawed we are. When you start looking at evolutionary psychology, you'll see that a lot of the ways that we respond, even in the workplace is like the modern savannah, is still full of the threats, as if we were running from saber-toothed tigers. I don't even know if humans were around at the same time as saber-toothed tigers, so please don't quote me in that.
Yeah, we're not here to be factually correct.
But in offices, it's constant threat. And the constant threats that you have in an office are making people unwell. It's terrible. So we operate in the same ways we've always done. However, the way that we use technology, it's to do with our behaviors, and the way that we're using the technology can be harmful. So I did a TEDx talk a few years ago, which was looking at how technology was actually damaging creativity. And there's lots of reasons that it's doing this. One is that we're outsourcing a lot of our brain power to devices. So we're outsourcing our thinking. So we just go straight to the calculator function, don't we?
Oh yeah.
Rather than actually adding things up in our heads or writing it down on a piece of paper. We're outsourcing our memories. And that is actually a problem, because if we're outsourcing memories to devices because something is stored on an internet, we're not remembering it. That means that isn't in our head to help us make ideas with. So there's a problem there. And as much as there's kind of a utopian view that, and I heard a previous guest of yours sort of talking about this, that the technology, as we use technology, it kind of is freeing us up for our minds to work on other stuff. It's enabling us because we don't need to remember stuff. Actually, I disagree with that, because what we do know is when we don't use parts of our brains prune those parts we don't use. So our brains are at the smallest they've been in 10,000 years. A lot of it is because we kind of don't need to remember how to get home from being 100 miles away. We've got Google Maps to help us with that. We don't need to know what the weather's going to be like this afternoon. We don't need to constantly be aware of movements in the shrubbery that could be a threat to us. So we've actually lost a lot of that. And we can see that not only has that happened to human brains, we can see that it's happened to domestic animal brains as well. So actually the brains of domestic animals are actually quite a bit smaller than those of wild animals. And the bits that are missing are the bits that are the aggressive function and the survival functions. And it's the same with the human brains. That's what we've lost. So this idea that technology is actually freeing us up to apply our minds to other things, I think, is a fallacy. Because what happens instead is that our brains just will continue to shrivel. The more that we outsource things to technology, the weaker our brains become, then the less powerful they become. The less powerful they become, the harder it's going to be for us to come up with breakthrough ideas. Yes, we can partner with technology for some of that, but really at the moment, nothing beats human brain power. And to be honest, we don't want anything to beat human brain power, because we don't want technology to be the dominant species on this earth. I certainly don't want it to be. And I think that we start to lose a lot of the beauty of life. So as much as I am actually a technologist, and I create my own sites, I code. I used to teach people to code. I'm a big believer in technology. I think that I'm a bigger believer in humans. And I'm really concerned about the way that we are using technology at the moment. And by saying that, I mean that I'm also concerned with the way that I'm using technology at the moment.
It's too easy to fall into, really.
Yeah, I think we have to. The brain's like a muscle, and the less we use it, the weaker it becomes. And it's one of the things I really want to make sure that that's at least discussed, and that people are aware of it, so that if we're walking into some apocalyptic situation where it's not that computers become more intelligent than humans, but that humans become less intelligent than computers, if that's our future, then we're walking into it consciously. I think that's the important thing.
Cool. Good way to move on to some quick fire questions then, if you're ready.
Sure. Now that I've brought everything down to
absolutely.
End of the world scenario.
I'm trying to bring people up here. Come on, work with me. So I always ask some of these questions, and this first one is probably sounds like it's absolutely set up, but name one must-read business book.
Oh, I would say Iconic Advantage by Sun Yu and Dave Birss. It was a book that I co-wrote at the beginning of the year with my friend Sun. And it's about a better way of doing innovation, using innovation to build your brand, to make it stronger in the minds of your audience. But of course, there's other ones that are fantastic. There's things like Made to Stick is a great book as well. If you want to just understand a bit about ideas, there's a tiny, tiny, tiny little book called A Technique for Producing Ideas that will take you 10, 15 minutes to read and will totally change the way you think about the way you think.
All those books seem to have a theme there.
Yeah.
Interesting. What was the last thing you Googled?
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Not that it was anything rude. I wasn't putting it into incognito mode or anything like that. This afternoon, I Googled a picture of my friend Patrick Collister. Patrick used to be vice chairman of Ogilvy back in the 90s. And he's a real advertising legend. He was creative director of part of Google up until a few months ago. Really, really fantastic guy. And I've been doing some stuff with him, and I wanted to draw a portrait of him. So I Googled a picture of Patrick this afternoon so that I could draw a portrait and send it to him.
What is your most used app at the moment?
It is it's a drawing app on, I mean, aside from the obvious like email and Chrome, I guess, it's a drawing app on my iPad, which is called Procreate. And I use that with my pencil because at the moment I've been doing a lot of illustrations. It's another thing that I do is I do a bit of stuff as an illustrator. And any illustrations I do on my iPad. And I've only just had my new series iPad for about 2 months with an Apple Pencil, and I just love it. So I do a lot of drawing on a sheet of glass with a silly white pen.
Excellent. Sounds amazing. What is your favorite theory, concept, or methodology?
I think behavioral economics has become such an interesting thing in recent years. I don't know if it really fits into that, but as a new branch of thinking, and things understanding the sort of motivations that people have, and I think it's becoming a bit of a renaissance. Really, we can apply this stuff to marketing and get a better understanding of actually why people make the decisions they make. So we've spotted in recent years, due to things like loss aversion and confirmation bias and all sorts of things that are behavioral economic principles, that when people make a decision on something like a car, you would imagine, because it is the second biggest purchase you make, that people would do lots of Google searches beforehand, and that they would be all about making sure they're going to make the right decision before they part with their cash, because classical economics would say that's what people do. And it's not. They found that, I can't remember the percentage, but it's around about 70 to 80% of searches for reviews of cars are made post-purchase to confirm that you've made the right decision.
Interesting.
And there's this kind of stuff that when we understand why people do what they do, it means that we can understand how to help them more. Obviously, behavioral economics, there are people who will try and use it for evil with everything. There's yin and yang. I think that any piece of technology that comes along or any new form of thinking brings every bit as much bad as it does good. But I think there's great opportunities to really, truly help people by understanding how and why they make decisions.
It's interesting you pick cars there because of two things. I suppose one, the conscious part says, well, the first thing I think about when buying a car is safety, which is probably not true. And the second one, when I bought a car many moons ago, I went, so what's the miles per gallon this does? I went, do you know what your current car does? No. It's like it just wasn't important. It's just he could have said 75. Wouldn't have had a clue.
Yeah.
I'd have just gone, right, okay. Wouldn't have made a difference. Great, stupid, absolute ludicrous. You're right about cars, and yeah, it's an interesting one that you picked up on cars. So, Dave, it's been great talking to you today. Final question, most important one. If people want to find out more about your book, buy it or buy any of your books, or get in touch with you, get a lasagna, maybe a drawing, perhaps a little jingle, where should they go?
I'm ridiculously Googleable. I believe there's about 4 Dave Birsses in the world. We all got in contact with each other a few years ago.
Love it.
The thing you have to be careful with, though, is when you Google my surname, you have to spell it correctly, because if you spell it wrong, you get the Jewish term for the circumcision ceremony, and you don't want to be Googling that on an office computer. So certainly not for an image search. So my surname is spelled Birss, or as the police would say, Bravo, India, Romeo, Sierra, Sierra. So if you search for Dave Birss, you'll find me on Google. You can find me at davebirss.com. You can find me under Dave Birss at Twitter. So it's just my name, all one word, Dave rather than David, and Birss rather than Jewish circumcision. And you'll be able to find me on the internet.
Dave, thank you so much for joining us. I think that's a perfect place to finish the interview. Book's out tomorrow. Go and buy it. I'm about halfway through it. Some really interesting stuff in there. Keen to get back into it once this podcast's over. So go out, go buy it. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Peter. Much appreciated. And thank you everyone for listening this long into the podcast.
Now, it wouldn't be a special or it wouldn't be any form of Marketing Study Lab podcast without some takeaways. So here's a few quick takeaways before you can dive right into Dave's book, which I know I'm going to be doing straight after I finish this podcast session. There are two types of thinking Dave mentioned: creative thinking and doing thinking. And some people can be more creative and others are more doers. So find out what you're good at, where your place is in this creativity. Innovative thinking can be taught. It's not something you're born with or without. Sure, some people are more creative than others, but it certainly can be something that you develop. Dave describes it as the input defining the output, which kind of makes sense. If your creativity inputs are minimal, low, boring, or dull, how do you expect the outputs to be any different? It's the same with any type of system, really. Take your CRM or anything. Input equals output. And speaking of systems, from a business perspective, it is said that there can be two types of systems. A stifling system, where it is all about control, and there are layers of fear dominating the hierarchical structure of that business. Or there's a system of liberation and free thinking. And I want you to go back to work tomorrow or today or whenever you're going and have a look and just consider, what kind of system are you working in? And if it's one that stifles creativity, how can you go about changing that and changing the culture? Maybe Dave's book could give you some answers. That wasn't a plug. That was just me thinking on my feet right there. And finally, really, and this is the plug, for more creative stuff, get Dave's book and let's all start to think about getting great ideas. Once again, Dave, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this first Marketing Study Lab special. Your book's out tomorrow. Congratulations on that, but it's not your first one, so kind of congratulations. Everybody, go to Amazon, type in Dave Birss, get the book, read it, and again, let's all get a bit more creative, a bit more free thinking, and let's get those great ideas flowing. Thank you so much for joining us today on Marketing Study Lab. It really means the world that you're listening to this out there. And hopefully I've provided you some value. If you're looking to know more about what Marketing Study Lab does and is about, go to marketingstudylab.co.uk or get in touch with me personally, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or feel free to email me at peter@marketingstudylab.co.uk. Happy marketing.